Hi everyone, you're watching TechTalks brought to you by The Girl Code, and our first guest is a developer, a problem solver, and a builder of really amazing things, Adrienne Tacke.
Hi. Hello, everyone.
Adrienne is a Filipino software engineer based in Las Vegas. She is an international speaker and a published author. She specializes in cloud computing and instructs Azure and cloud development on LinkedIn Learning.
Thank you so much for being here, Adrienne. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, so honestly, we want to start with something really interesting that we just read about you somewhere. You wanted to initially be a pastry chef and then sort of really took a really sharp pivot into tech. So how did that trajectory sort of take place?
So as a kid, and I still do now, I really love sweets. I love anything sweet. And anytime you mention somebody's, in love with sweets, they assume, they love chocolate or they love like candy or something. Like that's not the kind of sweets that I like. I like pastries. And so as a kid, I think my mom was making cream puffs with me one time. And the first time I tried it, I'm like, this is so amazing. Like, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. I just want to make this and sell it, and I'm going to be happy. And so for a really long time, I really was centered on that job. I'm like, okay, I'm going to go to pastry school. I'm going to do this and that. But obviously, that has all changed. Excuse me. That has all changed probably the moment I got into college. College is where that kind of changed for me, the realities of what I wanted to do and what I think would be a better benefit to me in terms of a career really came through in tech. And that story is it almost came to me by surprise, because even while I was in college, I changed my mind from wanting to be a pastry chef into, I think, international business. I was declared an international business pre-major when I started. And that reason was because I thought I wanted to be the next Anthony Bourdain. So I saw Anthony Bourdain's show and I'm like, that's what I want to do. That's my life. So it still involved food, but now there's a little bit of travel. But then I went to college here in University of Nevada, Las Vegas. And as I started taking my course here and learning about what that major entailed, it's not what I thought. It's like, no, you get your own guaranteed show after you graduate with this major. It's, you choose a specialty in business, whether that's accounting, marketing, finance, whatever it is, and you potentially work for a company that may have an international office. I'm like, oh, I don't want to do that either. So I only really found tech because I needed to find a job to help me pay for college. And that's kind of how the tech angle got started.
I just want to interject here and say that your trajectory is somehow so relatable to everybody, because when you're kids, you also want to have like this crazy dream of, being an ice cream vendor or just like being a pastry chef. And then you pivot to college when it's all about business and, you want the glamour of a talk show, obviously. And, and then, you finally end up like tech. You start with tech at least because this is going to pay the bills, like let's be realistic. So that's like such a relatable trajectory for, I think, everyone now. You were also like a published author. You wrote and published a book last year. I think it's called Coding for Kids in Python. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so maybe could you talk to our viewers a little bit more about what the book is about and what was your motivation for writing it?
Sure. So, go ahead.
Yeah, and why did you particularly choose the youth for as your target audience?
Yes,
like the kids.
Both good questions. So as I started my, actually it was my Instagram account, which I started, I don't know, like maybe 3 years ago. I started when I started my last job, the one before the one I have now, which is a senior developer advocate at MongoDB. So I was a software engineer for a small company here in Las Vegas. And at the time, I still wasn't on Instagram. So I was like, I felt super old. I'm like, let me just see what this Instagram thing is. And so I created an account, and naturally I started looking for like women in tech or other devs and stuff like that, things I'm interested in, gaming, all that. And so when I started looking, I didn't see anybody that looked like me, or whenever I would see other developers, it's always the same story, right? It's they didn't dress the way I did, they weren't looking the way I expected them to be. And so I'm like, well, I might as well just, I guess that's what my Instagram account's going to be about. I'm just going to share my particular journey, wear what I wear, and do all of that. So I started doing that, and it was doing pretty well. I had no goals to like grow it into a big following. Like I didn't want to be an influencer. That wasn't the goal. I just wanted to share my story. It just so happens that because I started to share little things, educational things, like the one series I started was Don't Be Afraid of the Terminal, where I shared
Yeah.
some bash commands because just not a lot of people know it. And so I'm really passionate about that. So all of that combined led to my account growing. And because it grew, I was actually contacted by a publisher to say, hey, we really like the way that you explain these concepts. We like how you break it down and you make it very accessible to more audiences, particularly those who don't have a programming background or otherwise, younger audiences. And so they had a request, or they basically needed somebody to write this book, which was a children's book to teach programming. So all of that was not my choice. It was they already knew it. And this company, this publisher, they market themselves as, they use some data science and some fancy calculations to predict what kind of books are going to be not only profitable, but also what people are searching for. So like, what do people want? What kind of books are they looking for? And they want to fill that need. And at the time, that was one of the needs, is they saw a lot of data that said, we want a children's book that teaches kids how to code in Python. And so, yeah, they came to me, we discussed it, and I wrote that book. It was probably one of the hardest things I've ever had to do, because I was working full time, not in this position, which not to say it would have been easier, but there's way more flexibility in my time. But the job that I had, I was a software engineer at that company. So I was working full time at that place, not remote. It was going to the office, and then I would come back home, and then I would have to write this book. And I wrote that book in the span of about, I think, 3 months. So sometimes you're super tired at work, and then you get home, and then there's like another deadline for like 2 chapters or something. And it was really difficult, but definitely worth it in the end.
That's really admirable.
Yeah, so I've been following you on Instagram for quite a long time now, and you mentioned your hashtag "Don't Be Afraid of the Terminal" series, and I really liked it. It helped me personally. So could you like explain more about it? Could you tell us more about the series that you did on Instagram?
Absolutely. So I should be going back into that. I miss those. But yeah, so when I was going, I don't know. I guess when I talk to other developers, particularly other women or even other junior developers, doesn't matter who you are. A lot of them just did not have any like command line experience, and the
Right,
first exposure to that is when you work with Git. So there are a
right,
lot
right.
of graphical tools to
Yes,
help you work with Git. But even those, like I tried them, I'm like, okay, for some things they make sense. Like when you want to see the branches and the trees, they're very helpful visually in that way. But for me, when I go through my normal workflow, I actually preferred the command line. I liked to,
right.
write my commits there, pull everything down. Like I got very comfortable with it. And
Hmm.
so I said, I'm surprised that not a lot of other people like use the command line. And when I would talk to other developers, like through meetups like this, or like conferences, or just other people here, I'd hear the same thing. They're like, oh, it's so scary. Like, I don't know what to do. What if I write the wrong command? It can be so powerful. But if I don't do the right thing, I'm like afraid. I'm like, no, I get that, because when I started, especially with Git, I'm like step by step, I'm like, okay, what
Right,
command do I do? And so that kind of inspired me to say, well, why don't I just like show them it's not that bad? Like I know exactly how you felt of being scared of this black box, but you could do so many things with it. And so yeah,
exactly.
I think that's how I kind of started that series, was because of that. So I started with what I thought were the basics, right? How do you change directories? How do you list what's on there? And then I started going to the more advanced stuff like Git rebase or some of the other things like Git merge, any of those things. And I would share as I learned too. So like even Git rebase now, I love to look up every now and then because I get scared. But yeah, I think it was just me wanting to share with everyone else that, hey, you don't have to be afraid of it. It's actually really, really helpful and makes you a little bit more productive once you're fairly comfortable with it. And I think it just needed something or someone to explain what exactly is happening to help others feel comfortable. So I think that's how I looked at creating those posts, is to just break it down step by step. And I think that really helped. And I think you said it helped you. So that's good.
It helped me for sure. Yes.
Yeah.
Honestly, Adrienne, it sounds like you've done like so many amazing things. I mean, you wrote a book in 3 months, you work a full-time job, and you're like such a big influencer, and it's really crazy. And then you're also like an instructor at LinkedIn Learning, which is really amazing. So you have like a cloud course. So maybe like actually we were hoping that you could sort of break that concept down for us. I feel like cloud is something just so integrated in our lives nowadays. I mean, anything from like Google Drive to Apple, like iCloud or something. I never really stopped to think about what does the cloud actually mean, and how a cloud platform operates. So we were hoping maybe you could sort of break that down for us and just into like in a very structural, like down to the basics sort of way.
Sure, I'll try my best. So cloud it's a very broad term, right? And we hear it associated with many things. When I first started learning, the best way that I could think about it is, so let's say you're already, like, remove the cloud for a second, and you're thinking of just creating software in general, right? Maybe you're on your own computer. It doesn't matter what language you're using. You create something, you write your program, or you create this application. And if you are running locally, like on your machine, whenever you test out what you're doing, you have something that's like local host, right? You deploy it and you are looking at it on your physical machine where you are. So now take this concept of whatever you're creating and imagine that you needed to have a lot of people look at that, and you don't want to use the resources on your machine because you won't be able to help all those people. Like, let's say you got super popular and you're awesome and everybody wants to see this amazing thing that you've created. If you let your personal computer be responsible for serving someone in Asia and someone in Europe, and like serving all of that content, or allowing them to look at that application and content with just your computer, it's probably not going to be very good. You might get some people, but at the end, there's a limit to what your computer can do. So I like to think of cloud computing as kind of taking additional resources, either extra power, extra either storage or extra processing power, things that you would not normally have like with you, next to you, locally, physically by you, and you kind of ask for help. You ask for someone else to help you serve your content to other people or help you deliver that to other people. So when I think of cloud computing to me is just like a friend that's lending you a bunch of extra machines. That's like the most not simplified answer, but I think the easiest way to think of it. Obviously, it's way more broad and complicated. You can get down to the nitty gritty, but that's what it is. You're asking for a little extra help to help power your application so that you can do one of, I think, two things. One is to either grow it, so that means scale it. And when I say scale, because it's also a buzzword, scale it as in have more people look at it all around the world. And number two, make it run better because of how many people are looking at it or using it. So in that sense, I think that's how I like to think of cloud in the most general terms.
Okay,
right, you really simplified that for us. Yeah, so like we see a lot of buzzword associated with cloud, like there's software as a service, which is really, really trendy right now. But we also hear about like platform as a service or infrastructure as a service. So what do these terms really mean? Like what's like the essence of these terms?
Yes. Sorry, coughing today. So yes, I got these three confused all the time. And sometimes I still I'm like, I have to really think about it. But I think we can start with software as a service first, because I think that's the easiest to understand. So software as a service is, I mean, all of us are probably using one at this time. No matter who you ask, we're all probably using one. And if you're using Gmail, if you're using Spotify, if you're using any of these things that you're using online, you're probably using software as a service, especially if you pay for it every month. So software as a service is like, it's this fully managed thing that you have not created, like you haven't touched it, you haven't had any part to it, and you being able to use it doesn't depend on you managing like the underlying layers of it. So like if it needs a server, if it needs storage to store the data, you don't manage that. You're completely hands off. Somebody else is taking care of that for you. You just simply use the thing. And that's software as a service. So I like to say you consume software as a service. Now, the next two, I always get mixed up, but I think the thing that I like to think about so there's platform as a service and there's infrastructure as a service. So software as a service, you consume, you use the thing, you have absolutely no say or deal with any of the resources. Platform as a service, I like to think of it as you build on platform as a service. So for example, platform as a service is like, for example, in Azure, you have things like Azure App Services, or you have Azure Devops, and these things, so now you're taking a little extra help from Azure by using some of their resources, like you use their servers, you use their storage, but you are creating the application. You are creating your app. So let's say you make, you make like your own Netflix, like there's Adrienne Flix, right? So I can create Adrienne Flix and I choose the code, I do whatever I want, I create that actual application, but then I use Azure to build on it. I use, again, it's analogous to the example I had, which was if I wanted to share this with both of you, I probably don't want you to access my computer all the time if you wanted to watch on Adrienne Flix. So instead, I want to use Azure's platform as a service, meaning the actual service that I deploy it to. And instead of you coming to my computer, you go to Azure's resources, you go to their servers, you go to their stuff, but and access my application there. So there, it's like a mix, right? You build on it. You may not have all the resources for your application, but that's where you use those cloud services in conjunction. But you have all the control over your application. So that's platform as a service. And then infrastructure as a service, I like to remember it as, so infrastructure, when you think of infrastructure, you think of like bridges and roads and paths and all that stuff in a city. It's the same thing with software. So to me, when I think of infrastructure, I think of the lowest level of resources and the most control over what you're doing. So if software as a service is you have absolutely no say and you don't touch any of the resources, and platform as a service is, well, you only have control over the application. Infrastructure as a service is obviously the complete opposite. You have full control over everything that's happening there. So you create the application, but you also decide what resources you want to power your application. So this is where things like, I don't know if that's, I won't say that for now, but yeah, so I think that's the best way to describe it. It's just you have the most control over all the resources that you want to use. So if platform as a service is, you're maybe using the pre-built like Azure App Service to deploy your application to. On infrastructure as a service, you are now choosing those particular pieces instead of using like a template per se of servers. You're now saying, no, I want specifically this many and I want it to run at this capacity. And you just have full configuration and control over all of those resources, and you also have full control over the application that you're building. So in short, software as a service, you consume, you use it. Platform as a service, you build on top of, and then infrastructure as a service, you host on infrastructure as a service.
That's really, really comprehensive.
Right.
Somehow also really precise. I mean, you were the explanation was really incisive. So
I don't think I'll forget the concept for a really long time now.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Also, so tech news is always buzzing about AWS. AWS has become a buzzword in itself, and with it bringing nearly 75% of Amazon's operating income. So why do you think cloud has become such a big hype? Why has it become so important from a business perspective, or to even run a business, or just why is Twitter always trending AWS?
Sure. So I think AWS is certainly up there. I'm going to say I like Azure because, so I think we start with, so AWS is just one of the cloud providers, right? It's one of the places that you can use some of these cloud services. The other two are Azure, Microsoft Azure, Amazon AWS or Amazon Web Services, and then there's Google Cloud Platform.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure there's some other smaller ones, but those are the big three. So these are the three providers, right? If you want to even think about going to the cloud, you're probably going to use from one of these three. Now, why I think it's trending so much, it has been going towards this way because, as we are growing in this world, if you think of it from a business perspective, what are the most successful aspects of it? You have to always be on. You have to be available everywhere. You have to make sure your thing works. If you need to do updates or maintenance, that can't ruin the experience of your customers. There's all these requirements that before could be handled with just having your application run on your own resources. So I guess let's go back a little bit. Before cloud, most companies had data centers, right? They had their own physical places, like huge server racks, and depending on what they do, they completely ran off of those. And they're local. They're either at the actual building where your office is, or in your state or something. They're all there, but you own them. You take care of it. So it's very similar to that infrastructure as a service in the sense that you are completely managing everything. You're dealing with all of that. As we started to grow and as storage and resources started to become cheaper, there was almost this change, this shift now to say, instead of us managing our own stuff, why not just pay a much cheaper amount, almost like renting those pieces instead of buying a $300,000 server for ourselves. And not only that, all the things that come with that, you have to update that, you have to maintain that. If you have a power outage, you have to make sure something is going to deal with that. Otherwise, you're going to lose all your data there. All of these responsibilities that came with maintaining your own stuff, it became difficult, especially if you grew and you needed more and more and more because you're becoming a global company. All of that became very difficult. So I think that's why, not now, but as we made the shift to cloud, maybe a few years ago, or in the last 10 years at least, people were like, I don't want to deal with that anymore. I want someone else to take care of it. And so these three cloud providers became really prevalent because, you have some of the best engineers. They had all the resources. They had resources that most companies could probably never dream of getting on their own. So if you wanted to launch in another country and you are a US based country, that's really difficult to do on your own. But with cloud, it's super simple because they take all of the hard work of building those resources for you. They have data centers in Asia, so all you have to do is pay like a monthly fee, and boom, you are able to now deploy to Asia whenever you want, and it was super easy. If you needed something called high availability, so let's say you have two data centers or two regions that you have deployed your application to, one on the East Coast and one on the West Coast. And let's say there's like a power outage. There's actually an actual power outage here in Vegas 2 nights ago. If that went down, most companies have a redundancy, right? They have a backup, just like we back up our stuff, and just in case something is wrong, it's the same thing. If they're running off of the East Coast one, or if they're running off the West Coast one, and there's a power outage, presumably you would then have all of your people go to the East Coast one because it's still running. And that's the benefit of having two. So having two areas to be able to host your stuff gives you better availability, right? You don't lose the chance of losing people because this is down. If you only had this one and you had the power outage and now you have nothing, well, now you're not running. Your website is offline, or people can't purchase anything, or people can't access Netflix. Like, those are all problems that I'm sure as a consumer. If any of those things happen, you're like, oh, I'm not using the service again. They're always broken. So that requirement in and of itself, to be able to always be on and always have something running despite a power outage, despite, I don't know, like a flood, any of these random things, or even if you have so many people using it, maybe you have one area, maybe the West Coast region is like overloaded and you need to, it's getting slow for these people. You want to route some of that traffic to the East Coast. Or another scenario is if you have like all of America, or let's keep going with America because I'm using that example. So if you are a full, like if you have America as your full customer base, you don't want people from the East Coast getting their information all the way from the West Coast. You're introducing artificial lag. Like, it's much slower, obviously, because they have to travel way further to get that data and then go all the way back. So that's another reason you would want two regions, right? You would have all of your West Coast people get their data from the West Coast data region, and all the East Coast people get it from the East Coast region. So it's a shorter trip, which means it's a faster exchange in data, which means a better experience. So like, these are all different scenarios of why you would want more resources and more places. And the fact of the matter is, the 3 cloud providers just like give that to you. They enable you to have that all of these advantages for your business that would otherwise be very costly for any random business to do on their own. So I think that's why it's becoming more popular, because in order to stay relevant now, because a lot of businesses are becoming global, they need those resources and they need it everywhere. And so using cloud providers and having all of that available to everybody is just so much simpler for businesses to use rather than to create it themselves.
Right. That was really comprehensive. Yeah. So, like, for our viewers out there who may be like interested in learning more about cloud computing, or like who are just starting out with it, could you talk a little bit about your own trajectory? Like, how did you get into the field, and like what are the essential coding skills that helped you along the way, and which still help you, right? Like,
sure. So there's many different areas I think that you can start. So for example, my first introduction to like anything cloud was in my last job, and it started with creating our continuous integration and continuous deployment processes. So what those are is in the software development workflow, I write code, write fixes, you have a code review, right? Your teammates check it. If it's good, that code is merged back in to your main branch that you're using. And then what normally happens is you have to deploy that somewhere, right? So before it was super manual, right? After you merge those changes in, you would have to build your application, and that was a manual. Basically, in order to get your application out into the world, before it was really bad, but you would basically copy and paste files over, right? You would copy it from my machine to maybe like another machine that is the production server. That's the one that everyone goes to and accesses. So that was the process. Obviously, that has gotten way better now, and that process, the copying and pasting, the deployment, that one we wanted to switch to a more automated and more structured process in my old team. So we started that by using Azure Devops. So Azure Devops is a service from Microsoft Azure that basically you create something called pipelines. And in these pipelines, they're really just steps, they're tasks of what you're supposed to do. So now we're taking our code, which, you know, all of that's the same. We code in our office, we open a code review, and then if somebody approves those changes, it's merged into our branch. All of that stays the same. So what changes now is, instead of us manually having to do anything to get it to the production server, we let Azure DevOps take care of that. And it's way more reliable, it's way more structured, and there's less chance for error because we're basically letting something else do it for us. So what are those steps? So the first part is a continuous integration pipeline. So what that means is every time we have a change that has been merged into our main development branch, all of those files, including the changes we have, need to be built. They need to be, you know, essentially run and checked against like our tests, checked against, you know, if you have any UI elements, like front-facing elements, make sure they're all looking correctly, they're working on all browsers, all those things, they're all automated now. And they are now triggered by the very fact of that change being merged into the development branch. So before, whereas if that was gone in, someone else would have to do all these tasks. Now, Azure DevOps is smart enough to say, hey, there's a new change on this branch. I need to go run all of these tasks. And that's what it's doing automatically. And that's super helpful for us as a team, because now we just have to focus on coding. All of that other stuff, it takes care of for us. And not only that, it's much more efficient because it can now run the tests. It can now do all of this other stuff instead of an actual person sitting there waiting, making sure it's going okay. So that process is done. And then the other part, continuous deployment, you can kind of infer from what it's called, but it needs to be deployed somewhere. And for us, we were already using Microsoft Azure app services. So we were using platform as a service. We're essentially using some of Azure's resources to deploy our application on. So everyone is using our app using Azure's resources. They were not going to our office's stuff. It was all Azure stuff, but it had to get there somehow, right? And so instead of us essentially copying and pasting from our computers to Azure's computers so that other people can use it, well, we have something called continuous deployment, which are, again, just automated steps to say, hey, if all of these checks are good and they pass, then you take all of our stuff, that's this package, essentially the package of our code, all of the dependencies it needs, so like any libraries it needs, everything it needs to run in our code, we package it up, and then we let Azure DevOps take care of taking it for us and putting it on their servers. And then all of that is an automated process. So all of that to say, in the middle of learning all of that with my team, I was really like interested. I'm like, wow, there's so much you can do. And that's just one small part. I'm sure you've heard of all kinds of things now that they're offering. If you want to add like AI, what's the word I'm looking for? essentially, if you wanted to add some sort of artificial intelligence capabilities into your app, instead of you building it on your own, you can use something from Azure because they have way more people working on it, way more practice on it. It's almost like, I like to think of it as like Legos, right? If you need something, you can just pick and choose parts that you need from Azure or AWS or Google Cloud provider, and you plug that into your application, whatever you need. And if you needed that kind of capability, then you can use that service from Azure. So I think seeing how many different things that are available from Microsoft Azure or any cloud provider, and the fact that I as a developer can just pick and choose and like learn how to integrate it, to me that's super exciting, because there's no way that I'm going to have enough time to learn how to build all of these things from scratch if I wanted it as part of my application. So it's better to let all the other engineers, the much smarter people who are focused on that stuff, really make those things awesome. And then I can just pick and choose and plug them into my application as I need. So yeah, that's kind of how my trajectory in cloud started. And then in the same fashion, because again, I don't see so many people in general, and women especially, in cloud, it's something again that I want to share, kind of like the terminal. I'm like, it's actually really awesome. It can be intimidating. There's so much stuff out there, but I think once you learn about it, I think it actually would interest a lot of people. So that's kind of why I'm focused now on sharing cloud computing as a whole to developers who may be interested.
Right.
Yeah,
That's a really good thought.
Yeah, it's a long answer.
Yeah, so
Krishna, go ahead.
yeah, so like as an Asian woman in this space, like you've been in the tech field for quite a long time now. So how have your experiences been like in the field, you know? Like, do you think you've been treated differently than your male counterparts? And like if you were, then how?
Yes, absolutely. I had it's kind of funny. Most of my experiences are, they match most women's, but it's kind of funny because my very first software engineering job, my entire team was actually all women. So that was
that's nice.
that was the first and only time I ever had this happen to me. So I guess I would feel very lucky that I had this experience first. But yeah, I was in college. I was working for the university, University of Nevada, Las Vegas, the software development department. And yeah, my particular team was all female software engineers. So I'm like, and at the time, I didn't even realize that there was a disparity because, you know, my own team was all women. So it was only after I moved out of that job that I noticed and started to see, whoa, that was actually very rare that it was all women. So after I left that job, I started to now see these kinds of things that you hear about all the time. So right after that job, I had a junior .NET position for another company here in Las Vegas. And this time I was the only female. And so in that team, I certainly felt like I had to prove myself a little more. I felt like I wasn't taken seriously. And I don't know if that's a combination of being like a junior role, but also that I'm a woman. But it was very different. And that was the first experience or first team that I had where I felt just, there was a particular teammate that I had, and this person was a senior developer, but a lot of the things that they would do in their code reviews, I would point out and say, this is not right. Or like, I would get frustrated because I'm like, you're supposed to be the senior, but I'm calling out all of these things that you're supposed to be, you know, not supposed to be doing. And so I would not be quiet about that. I'd say, this is wrong and this needs to be changed and this and this and this. And then they were basically just like not even listening to me. They're saying, no, you don't know what you're talking about. This is okay. This is working and all that stuff. So I got really frustrated, and I would actually tell my manager at the time, like, are we okay with this? Not the quality I'm okay with. All of these things are wrong. This person's supposed to be a senior, and yet I'm pointing out all of these things. Like, what gives? And this person at the time, which is like, well, maybe try talking to this senior dev to see if you can come to a conclusion. So basically, I had no support to say, no, you're right. Like, there's a whole bunch of other issues there. But the point I'm trying to make is that, yes, I had my fair share of feeling like I needed to prove myself, not being taken seriously. How I dressed was another thing. So I'm not afraid at all. Like, I like to wear dresses. I like to wear heels. I like to wear skirts. And these are all things that I've been told. They're like, well, you're not going to be taken seriously as a programmer if you wear this. I'm like, why not? They're like, well, developers, programmers, they don't wear that stuff. They wear, like, the typical thing. Like, they wear black hoodies and jeans and all this stuff. I'm like, well, I don't like wearing those things. I like wearing what I wear. And so they're like, well, that's fine. You can wear what you wear, but you're not going to be taken seriously. I'm like, that's so stupid to me. Why would I not? Yeah. Like, to me, what's more important is the work that I'm doing good? And if there is something, like, the work should matter, not what we look like. And so that really, really frustrated me for a very long time. I got a lot of these little like incidents too. One of the most infamous ones that I always share is, so I got a call from a recruiter, and this recruiter was like, hi, are you, Adrienne, we actually have an opening for a programmer. I'm like, okay, that sounds good. Can you tell me more about it? Or, they would ask me, what is your experience? So I told them, like, oh, at this time I had, I don't know, like maybe a couple years of experience with .NET, and I've done this and that, all that stuff. And they're like, oh, okay, that's great. And they're like, so do you have experience with like publisher and like InDesign? I'm like, no, but why is that related to this job? And they're like, well, it's for the programmer job. I'm like, are you talking about programs, like actual programs, like the one that you get at events, like paper physical programs, like brochures and stuff? She's like, yeah, what else do you think I would be talking about? I'm like, well, I'm a programmer. Like, I write code to create applications. And she's like, oh, honey, those jobs are for the men. I'm like, what? And this was maybe maybe 4 or 5 years ago. So to me, it shocked me that this was still like an existing mindset. I'm like, I can't believe someone just said that to me, let alone another woman, let alone for another job. So I share that story all the time because I'm like, at least it's gotten way better now, but it's still a little bit of a problem that there's this prejudice and like preconceived notion that specific jobs are for specific people, and that's absolutely not true. And so I took that phone call, and I was more upset. I was angry. And I know for a lot of other women and girls, if they had experienced that, they probably would just be like, forget it, I'm not going to do this again. They would feel so upset, and like that imposter syndrome would kick in. And I'm not saying like, oh, I'm so strong. Like, of course it hurt me, and I've certainly felt those too, but I was more angry. I was more like, I want to prove you wrong rather than be upset and all that. So I absolutely still felt imposter syndrome, and there are many times where I'm like, maybe they're right. Maybe I'm not supposed to be here, or maybe it's not for me. But in the end, I always came back to, well, no, I actually did a lot of stuff. And no, I kind of want to prove you wrong. So whether that's good or not, that was what kind of fueled me to keep going in this career. It was like, no, I'm going to prove you wrong. I'm going to wear what I want to wear, and I'm going to do what I want to do. And, it's going to be you are going to be the one not laughing in the end, because you have these preconceived notions of what a proper developer is supposed to look like. So all of that to say, now I've been doing this thing, like I think I had a talk settled, but I didn't share it yet. But this phrase I have where I'm like, there's no developer uniform. I've been really trying to spread that to everyone that I talk to, especially other girls and women. And so part of that is just like going to, there's like some elementary schools here, and they have little girls, like fourth graders, fifth graders, and I go there and I talk there and I wear like a dress and and heels. And then, they get the same thing. They're like, "You're a programmer?" I'm like, "I have never seen a programmer like you." I'm like, "I know, I am a programmer." But it's really, really awesome to show these girls that it's not what they think. And so that's certainly starting to shift. Like now that I go to these schools, I see more and more girls joining Girls Who Code clubs. I see more schools actually introducing coding much younger, which is awesome. And yeah, it's slowly starting to turn. There's still a little bit of that, I don't think it's for me. But once they start going into it, whether that's like playing with Legos or using scratch blocks or anything, like I think it's super important to just show them what you can do with it, and then they find out on their own that like, hey, this is really fun and this is cool. And then all of that just goes away about who is supposed to do these kinds of things and not. They just know that this is a fun thing and they want to continue pursuing it. So all of that is to say, I hope to do more of that stuff. And that's why I'm happy that you contacted me for this, because I want you to, I want everyone to know that if it's something that you find interesting, you should definitely pursue it and not be afraid of it just because of what you think is the right person to do this kind of job. So
I think that's a
Right.
really
Let
amazing
me just tell
perspective.
you, yeah, and your journey has been amazing and you're doing a great job.
I
Thank
actually
you.
wanted to
Yeah.
add a little bit about when you were talking about people calling you out for the way you dress just because it's not the way typical programmer dresses. I think that when you go to schools and you're in a dress and in high heels just because you want to be, and then you're talking to little girls like that, I think that's so powerful because it just,
Yeah.
dresses and heels are associated with femininity, and when you walk into a school wearing those feminine symbols and being like, "Hey, I code," that's just like a really powerful message. So I really love that. And as to your point about the imposter syndrome, I remember reading in one of your blogs actually about how, the tech world is so competitive and so cutthroat that basically everyone faces imposter syndrome. But then women have the added, the we're imposters because we're women sort of syndrome. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's so true. It's like, it's so competitive already out there, and then on top of that you're just being discriminated because of the way you look and who you are. So yeah, your journey of through just going to elementary schools and talking about it and talking to us about it, we really appreciate so much, and you're doing amazing work.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I want to make it clear, I know it looks like it's, I'm taking this on, it's all great. I still feel imposter syndrome sometimes too. And especially during the beginning of my journey, there were many points where I felt it. So for me, I just continued to focus on number one, proving all these people wrong. But number two, I really just said, if I just focus on my work and get better and better and do this and help other people, then there's absolutely nothing anybody can say to me that brings me down. So sure, make fun of my heels, or just, you're before, they used to really hurt me, especially the comments on Instagram. And I was made a meme on Facebook for some time, and everyone's like, "That's not a real programmer." I'm like, okay. And it upset me because I'm like, wow, there's really this many people who still have that mindset. And so absolutely, I was upset. And I was off social media for a few days after that became a thing. I think it just, as the days go on, it took me a while, but you just learn to kind of ignore those things. So before, if I get a nasty comment on Instagram, I would sit and wonder, I'm like, what's a really good comeback that I can say and reply? And I used to do that. But now I'm just like, you know what? I'm not even going to engage. It's not worth my time. So I'm just select this person, block them, that's it. And people are like, oh, don't think of it as a weakness. It's more like they don't deserve your time. Everything they're saying is based on really dumb prejudices, or they want to continue perpetuating that coding is not for everybody. So why waste your time like even engaging that? So it's taken me a long time to get to that point, but I am at that point now. So I want to just make that clear. It's not like, you know, I expect overnight you're going to be resilient and this is not going to bother you. No, I totally get it. It still hurts and it still stings, but after a while you're just like, nope, this is what I want to do. I really don't care. Everything that you say is not true. And if you really like what you're doing and you enjoy what you're building and what you're learning, I think in the end, that's going to be most important. And as you start to create your own achievements, right? So like after I wrote the book, I'm like there's nothing you can say to me now. Like, have you written a book? Like write a book first, then you can make some comment about me. And then kept going, kept focusing. And then after I created my LinkedIn learning courses, you know, it's not arrogant. It's like I'm celebrating the fact that I got to this point working hard. And it's just reminding myself, like, if any of these people or trolls, anyone wants to bring you down, just kind of remind yourself, like, you know, until you have gotten to this point where you have, you know, either given something back to the community or actively tried to help others, then you shouldn't really give them the time of day if they say you're not a real programmer. I'm like, and again, before I'd be like, I feel like I would have to explain all of this, right? I'm like, oh, I'm an author and I'm a this and I'm a that and I did this and I did that. It's like I had to list all of my achievements to be taken seriously. I don't do that now. I'm like, I am what I am. This is what I did. I'm proud of it. But I don't like boast about it unless it's brought up, right? Like, oh, do you have a course? And yeah, I'll share it. But before I used to use that as like, you know, to prop myself up and say, I'm so much better than you because I have this. But I learned that it's better to just continue to focus and continue doing the next thing, right? Everyone's going to find all of this stuff. Like, you found my book, other people find my courses. I don't have to like shout it out off the rooftops, you'll find it. But all of that is just to say, all of this together has certainly helped me be more confident in myself. And anytime I encounter something nasty like that, like a nasty comment or even someone, you know, acting, it's very, very low now, but sometimes when I go to conferences, people kind of like don't talk to me because either they're intimidated or because they don't believe that I'm actually a programmer. Yeah, all of that, unfortunately, it gets easier, but if you can learn to not let that bother you now, I think you'll be much better in the long run. So.
Yeah, I think your like entire experience as a woman in programming is like, I mean, it's
So much
something
inspiring.
It's inspiring, and it's also like something that everybody goes
Yeah.
through. But I really love that how you sort of transitioned from, you know, being so angry about it and then continuing to pursue like, you know, what you were doing, and then transition to, being so proud of the things you've already done, and then finally you sort of accepted that like I don't, yeah, I'm like, you know, you sort of like have like your own sort of self appreciation. I don't like, you know, need to broadcast it to people. I think that's like such like a real and such an authentic journey, which like I think almost every woman in Silicon Valley or in programming goes through. So that's really, really fantastic. And I know we've taken up so much of your time, but just like a last quick question about any advice you would like to give to somebody who's, you know, like 8th, 9th grader, 10th grader, who's in high school, who's like, you know, just starting out with tech, or, you know, interested in tech, and just like, you know, any advice you would give any girls in high school who think coding is really cool?
So number one, aside from everything I just said, you absolutely belong here. If this is something you are interested in, pursue it. Number two, it's not actually all about coding. I think there's a lot of emphasis on if you want to get into tech, sure. A lot of it deals with code and you might have to know some code at some point. But, you know, there are some women who don't like coding. They maybe like design, or maybe they like game development and developing like narratives and stories for games. Maybe they have a different like my view is so narrow because I'm in software development. So obviously all the jobs to me look like something that deals with code, but tech is so much more than that. I just want you to, if you're interested, like, don't feel like it has to be a development job. Find other positions in tech, whether that's with a tech company or doing something that supports the development of things. There is a place for you in tech that aligns with your interests. So I just want to make that clear. If you want to work in tech, it does not have to be a coding job. There's so many other branches that you can find something that you really enjoy and still be a part of that. And then absolutely you're part of the tech industry. So it does not have to be code. And then number 3, I think just once you get into it, or even if you are just starting out, share that interest with other women, even your younger sisters, your group of friends. I think if we show how much more accepted this is, like if you see your friends and they say, oh, I'm super interested in working with a Raspberry Pi and making some really weird robot, like show them that you're interested in that, then you make this pool of women and girls larger, and you give more people the chance to see other girls and other women doing something. And unfortunately, when more women and girls, or just anybody, if anybody sees other people doing something, they're more likely to feel okay and not be as afraid, because they're like, oh, that person's doing it, that person looks like me, or that's somebody I trust, or that's my friend. And if you grow this community of potential people to serve as role models, then there's a higher chance that other people are not going to be as afraid. You make the pool wider by saying, oh, it's not only, this particular kind of person that you see related to this subject. It's, you see all kinds of people doing this just because it's something awesome. So if you end up going into the tech industry, or even if it's just like a phase right now and you're playing with something, I just really encourage everyone to share that with other women, other girls, other people, because then you get more people knowing that you're interested in it, and it's not just one kind of person in this particular subject. So
right.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much,
That
Adrienne.
was really some great advice. Yeah.
And I mean, both of us, I think, I speak for myself, but I'm sure I speak for Krishna as well. We really appreciate you being here, and we absolutely loved your entire journey.
It was really nice and really inspiring.
It was so inspiring, and I think that just your perspective, it's really incisive, and I think we really appreciate that. Thank you so much for
thank you so much
being in this conversation with us. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely, no
Thank
problem.
You.
Thank you for having me here, and I'll be happy to be back anytime too.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Have a great day.